You are listening to Been There, Done That. We present some of the smartest people connected to the business of coffee. People who've succeeded in the tough grind of hospitality by staying ahead of the rest. So join us as we explore the secrets to their success and help you accelerate your business. This show is brought to you by the Coffee Commune, where the coffee community comes to collaborate. Enjoy the show.
Hi, you're listening to Phil Di Bella on another episode of Been There and Done That, when we bring amazing people to you from different walks of life that have been there and done that. We don't have any time for people that are 2-minute noodles here on the show. We only want experts. And today I have an expert in one of the areas that I absolutely love. The theme for this quarter at the Coffee Commune is all about people and performance and, people and culture and all the things that go with that. And today I have with me Marija, who's the director of Momentous Australia. Marija, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Phil.
It's a pleasure. And as I said, we interview all sorts of stuff, lawyers, accountants. I can't say they tickle my fancy the best of times, even though we work with the best ones in the business. But a topic like this I love. I'm going to be really delving deep in all things performance, productivity and belonging. How do we get the best of our people, and especially targeted leaders? So for the listeners, it doesn't matter whether you're in the cafe industry or the hospitality industry or any industry, because I know we've got listeners from all walks of life. How do we become better leaders? Because it's changing. The times have changed. The needs and wants of our people have changed, along with the customers, and therefore we as leaders or aspiring leaders need to change that we operate, and that's the stuff we're going to talk about. But before we do that, Marija, tell us a little bit about yourself, and in particular, what really gets you excited in terms of the workspace that you're doing, and what problems do you love solving?
Yeah, thanks, Phil. So I guess a little bit about me. I love people. I believe in people, and I also believe that as humans, we have an ability to evolve and to change and improve. Now, having had a career in organisations, in professional services across various industries, I've seen the impact that leadership can have, not just on people, on customers, on the business, but in society. Because whether we like it or not, who we are as leaders affects our staff, and they go home to families, to communities, to organisations, word spreads, reputation spreads, and also we've got an impact on their well-being. And their future. So I believe in good leaders create great businesses, great teams, great individuals, and a great society. Yeah,
isn't that fantastic and so well put? And Marija, very passionate about developing great leaders. Bit of background. Shari's given you, our membership manager's given me on you. You deliver bespoke programs. That's what obviously Momentous Australia does, and our wonderful producer will make sure that your details are on the podcast for people to look up, and your website and that to follow you and get a hold of you. But you love your love is about leaders. You love building programs that help leaders gain capabilities to lead confidently, but more importantly in today's times, right? That's a big one. We've got to get better at what we do. So tell us, what's the big difference between a leader now versus a leader 5-10 years ago?
Yeah, that's great, Phil. And I suppose if it's a great question. I suppose if it's okay with you, I might take a sort of a step back even further. So we find ourselves in what's called the digital age today, and I'll get into some of what that is. Mm-hmm. But if we take a step back right to the early roots of leadership and management, it was basically developed for an industrial age. So if you think about factory workers, it was some of those techniques and philosophies were developed where there were stable environments, not a lot of change. The goal of the game was compliance. Mm. Leaders were seen as the all-powerful, all-knowing people that had all the answers to the problems. And there wasn't really a strong connection to the customer. Mm. And so even in the last sort of 5 or 10 years, we've seen huge movements about empowerment for people. Leaders are now not so much the big, powerful beings that have all the answers, but they're seen as coaches now who know how to lead and inspire and draw out the best of their people, which includes, complex problem solving, innovation, and really great customer experience.
Yeah, you've explained that well. We've gone from an era of I say you do to how can we, and that was probably the biggest change I've seen. 22 years in business of owning businesses and 34 years in the hospitality industry, working for my brother. Who used to very much be a good leader, but was always about I say you do and just do it, versus we've moved into an era now that it is more of a coaching role and support, and it's more of the words of we. So you've explained that beautifully. Tell us, it's changed a lot from the traditional style. What do you think's driven this change? I mean, the digital era, let's unpack that, right? What do you think is really, explore that digital concept a bit further on what's driven the change?
Yeah, absolutely. So, look, I'm going to be a little bit controversial, which
Go
I'm
for
not
it.
afraid of.
No, not afraid at all.
Traditional leadership is dead. Right? It's dead. It serves no purpose. So it's like coming to a problem and using old tools. You wouldn't pull out a hammer out of your toolbox and try and fix a computer problem with it. And unfortunately, when I work with organisations and even in society, these are some of the things we're seeing. People are just not equipped with their current leadership skills from the old sort of viewpoint of leadership to deal with the problems of today. And so some of the factors for change is, firstly, and I know that you're well aware of this one, having listened to your previous podcast, is about the economic uncertainty that we're facing at the moment. And so when we're in an environment of uncertainty, so we've got, the leadership in the RBA telling people one thing, fast forward a few months / years, the reality is different in terms of interest rates, consumer confidence is down. That means consumer spending is down. So to your point in a previous podcast, rather than attracting sort of the same customer base and upselling, we've got to now be more competitive and attract future customers.
More customers because they're spending less.
Yeah, bigger customer pool. And so that uncertainty sort of comes throughout the whole economy, as we know. The other thing is the hyperconnectivity. So now with technology, what happens in your workplace and your cafe can often end up on social media networks. Your reputation is out there. You're not just sort of building your reputation in Brisbane, but the whole world is now the stage. And likewise with the consumer dollar as well. And probably the third change, which I know is quite common in the hospitality and coffee industry, is that we've got talent shortages. So, pardon me, those shortages are happening across industries, Australia-wide and worldwide. And so when you have an industry that relies on often international students, often younger people, that's a real challenge. So how do you attract and retain that talent? And something that we're also seeing with businesses that we work with is it's not just necessarily a shortage of people, i.e. no bodies to do the work, but it's actually compounded with a skill shortage as well.
Yeah, and you're right, because what we've seen of late, and I was actually having this discussion this morning with somebody, is that, hospitality industry, so a cafe used to compete with other cafes to attract or retain their staff. If I've got a good barista, I've got to keep them, because if I don't, they'll go be a barista somewhere else. Now what we have, right, and I'd love your comment on this, but now what we have is we're losing them to Uber drivers, because Uber runs a platform and says, $45 an hour is the average wage for an Uber driver. And recently with, obviously, which is causing a lot of controversy, is I call them the lollipop holders, right? The traffic controllers, on $206,000 a year, which is about, $80 to $100 an hour. So you're not just trying to attract and retain staff from the hospitality industry. Now we're losing them to other industries because, of course, all the factors you mentioned, the cost of living's gone up. People need to secure more income for their families. And they're not just looking at going from one cafe to cafe A to cafe B. They're saying, well, if I can stop being a barista here and go hold a stop-go sign and make, 3 times the wage, well, I need to do it to pay my mortgage and pay my family. So you make some really good things, which comes down to, let's filter it down what that all means for people listening on the show. We have to be better as leaders, right? We have to, as you said, Marija, we've got to coach them. We've got to guide them. Give us some tips that you're finding really work in the place now with your programs, and we'll talk more about your programs after. But what are the tips that are really working? What are the topics that you're really going after to get the best out of our people? Yeah,
thanks, Phil. Probably one of the things as well that we've seen, just to sort of add to that and to give us a bit more of a background, employee engagement is at record lows across industries. So Gallup did a report last year on the state of the workplace, and particularly in Australia and New Zealand, they're reporting that 67% of employees are quiet quitting. So that phenomenon was quite prevalent in the last couple of years. And so when we think about what that means for the customer experience, obviously digital leadership is also about being very customer-centric. You think about walking into a cafe or any business and the employees aren't engaged. What does that mean for the customer experience? Is that customer and that dollar going to come back into your business, or are they going to go elsewhere?
So therefore, what do we need to do? How as an expert in the space, what do we do with our cafe owners? The cafe owners listening to this saying, "Yep, I resonate with that. I've got some of my staff not engaging with the customers. They're not turning up engaged." How can the person listening fix that? Yeah.
So in comparison to traditional leadership that didn't really have a connection with the customer, we have to start as leaders the customer has to be the centre of our existence, the centre of the purpose of our business and our people. And so when we're working with businesses to design their strategy, it has to start with that.
Yep.
So how does your strategy differentiate you from other people in your market, in your industry? What is it about your customers that you can provide that makes you unique? And once we've established that, we then go and map the employee experience journey. So what kind of employees are you wanting to attract?
Yeah.
What is the differentiator in terms of your unique value proposition to
Fantastic.
get them in?
Yeah.
And so the way that I see it is the customer experience and the employee experience are actually two sides of the same coin. So when you nail your employee experience and you provide a great environment to be in, you provide great leadership, a supportive environment, learning opportunities, that will then translate into the customer experience. So what I would say is anyone that's wanting to level up their leadership skills for this digital age that we find ourselves in, number one is start with the customer.
Yeah.
Number two would be obviously invest in yourself, because leadership is not something you're born with necessarily, although some people are born with some innate abilities. Leadership is actually a skill that can be learnt. And so you can absolutely learn and develop how to be a great leader. So I would invest in yourself. So whether that's listening to podcasts like this one, you can hire a coach, you can do leadership development programs.
They can reach out to yourself at Momentous Australia, of course, and get one of the programs.
Absolutely. But we can even leverage technology. So now AI tools are being used to develop leadership skills, just in terms of you can ask it to act as a coach for you can ask it to act as an HR advisor, and that can also help you level up. And so in terms of other things, I would say your view of yourself as a leader also needs to change. So if you are coming from a do as I say mentality, if you're coming from a bureaucratic, hierarchical sort of compliance-based view of leadership, unfortunately that's not going to serve you. So when you move to a digital leadership style, that means that you're more inclusive, you're more empowering of your staff. So we don't need to have all the answers as leaders, but what we need to do is create an environment where people can have the ability to problem solve. So we know that in this unprecedented rate of change, people need to have problem solving skills.
Yeah.
And the way that you can do that as a leader is to actually give them the authority and the empowerment to do that. So we know tech companies who are obviously at the forefront of change and rapid sort of development, what they do is they empower their staff to have hackathons. So they'll post a problem that the business might have, and they will literally give their staff time off or allow them the ability to present solutions to these problems. And from a profitability perspective, some of the best innovations in tech companies have come from this sort of a thing, where it's not the leader leading it, but just empowering them.
Yeah, some great points. Yeah, look, I often say, we talk about start from the outside in, as in your words, the customer. At the end of the day, you've got to be solving a problem for the customer, and you've got to be more relevant than your competition in solving that problem. And you've explained it really well. Some great tips there for the listeners. Start with the customer in mind. Understand that then it's about your staff. And one thing that people don't do enough of, and again, in 22 years of experience in owning business, therefore leading teams across the world, is that everybody wants to belong, right? They want to belong, and they want to be part of the journey. And you said it well. One of the key strategies there for the listeners, if you missed it, is ask questions. Ask questions. So once you've depicted exactly what the customer looks like, what your customer experience is that you want to have, what your unique selling proposition is, all the things that Marija said, is then sit down with your staff and say, guys, this is what we are aiming for. This is the parameters to operate in, and then give them the autonomy to make it happen. So really well outlined there. Let's talk about the concept of belonging, because I've been fortunate enough being part of the Young Presidents Organisation. I get to do stuff globally with Harvard's Business School, London Business School. I was recently at an amazing workshop with Gilbert Inoki. Some people will know that name, some people won't, but they'll certainly know the All Blacks, the best of the best teams in the world for the last 23 years. And he's the mastermind and leadership coach for the All Blacks. And he talked about the sense of belonging, so let's unpack that from your perspective and your experience, the importance of belonging, making your people belong if you really want to get the best out of them.
Yeah, absolutely, Phil. That's a great point. And I suppose also, coming back to coaching as well, the fact that sporting teams have coaches should highlight that leaders also need coaches. But to your point on belonging, we are human beings. And so innately, we are drawn to hear about unique human experiences. So regardless of how far technology progresses and how rapidly it progresses, as human beings, we want to feel a sense of connection. And that's sort of why also lately in the last few years, we've had these huge epidemics of loneliness and isolation as people have moved away from office environments as well. So it's great to have the, hybrid workplace, but how do you make your people belong? And so part of that comes out in the coaching leader. So I have never met a leader, a good leader, a successful leader that treats all of their people the same.
Yeah, agreed.
And so what I mean about that, Phil, is if you're treating all of your staff the same, you're actually missing the point that they're individual human beings. They have individual dreams. They have individual motivators. Somebody's motivator might be salary. Somebody's motivator might be opportunities for leadership development. And someone's might be, hey, I just really need to leave on time so I can get my kids from school.
Yeah.
So that's why you've got to really know your people. And that means sometimes having uncomfortable conversations. So when people feel heard and they feel listened to and they feel acknowledged as an individual, they can belong. But also I want to talk about some diversity of thought as well. So at the moment in the collective, there are lots of arguments around diversity. And so as a woman, women come up all the time, different sexualities come up all the time, and different nationalities come up. Now, I'm a woman and a child of migrants, so this is the best country in the world. I just have to say that. I'm very passionate about being an Aussie. But what we're missing sometimes in this collective conversation, Phil, is the diversity of thought.
Yeah.
So my staff doesn't necessarily have to have, all the shades of the rainbow in it. But what I need to do is give people an opportunity to present differing ideas to our leadership discussions, to our workplace discussions. And that comes back to being, a great leader in the digital age, is that it's not hierarchical and I know everything. It's how do I invite some of those conversations into our strategy meetings, into our team meetings, so that different ideas and opinions can be heard.
I love that diversity of thought, and creativity versus tick and flick. Because if I hear another thing about she's female, we need a quota, you're actually being derogatory. It really is derogatory. If I was a female, I would feel vindicated by somebody saying, oh, we need X amount of females on this board and that's why you're here. At one stage at Di Bella Coffee, it was an 80-20 ratio. 80% of my leadership team were female, not because they were women, but because they were the best person for the job. And I can assure you that the appreciation of those people was far greater, that they knew they were chosen, especially with someone with my persona. They were chosen because they were the best for the job, as they are today. I choose people in relation to who's the best fit for the job. As Jim Collins says, the right people on the right seats of the bus, not what, nationality they are, not what sexuality they are, and certainly not what gender they are. And so I love that the concept that you just talked about, the diversity of thought, the diversity of your ideas, bring them to the table on how we can be, as a team, I say, be better tomorrow than today. So fantastic. Tell me, leadership's changed a lot. We talked about where we are now. Where are we going? Where do you put the crystal ball on? The listeners will be listening. Okay, yep, I can follow that. I've seen where we are, where we were, where we are now. Where do you think we're going? And how should we be equipped as leaders to deal with what's next?
Yeah, thanks, Phil. That's a really good question. So in my work, some of the trends I'm seeing, and I can forecast sort of into the future, which I think is a reasonable sort of crystal gazing to do. So I would say that we're going to see trends in organisations where organisations are going to start to flatten out. So some of those layers, particularly in very, very large organisations, are going to flatten out as we empower people. So basically some of those sort of more tedious tasks in organisations are going to be automated, or they're completely going to be taken away with technology.
Yeah.
And so what does that mean? Well, we're through the use of technology and leveraging it, we're going to see people's roles change. And what I mean by that is that their skill sets required are going to have to be sort of an increase, more sort of knowledge-based skills,
more modern, right?
More modern skills, absolutely, as some of those tasks are done away with. So that's a trend that I'm seeing, yeah.
And I'll just add an example in there. We've got a great BD manager here at the Coffee Commune who's been in this industry for 30 years. So, he's in his 50s and we've just introduced HubSpot, and of course the coaching that's going into our wonderful BD manager is going to take a little bit longer to uptake than somebody in their 20s because, of course, his style of leadership, and he's brilliant at what he does, and he's been brilliant in this industry across different organisations he's worked in, and that's why we're so lucky to have him here at the Coffee Commune. But onto your point right there as an example in action is that if I was to treat our BD manager, Dean is his name, if I said to Dean, hey, okay, you can just keep doing what you're doing, he's not going to be current. Whereas we've said, no, we know that you come from the past type of leadership to now to the future is about technology, and we need you to be, across the concept of HubSpot. We've put a dedicated coach there for him to learn it, and he's picking it up nice and, in good time. But it's a point. And in summary, with that little example is, don't make allowances for team members that say, I don't want to learn, because if you don't learn, you die. Look at Kodak, look at Nokia, look at Ericsson. These are all examples of companies that refuse to look into the future. So I just wanted to use that example right there because it is important for listeners to understand you can't have your baristas doing what they used to do. There's new technology. They weigh their coffee. They use, puck press to tamp their coffee. There's automatic dosing now. The way they make coffee today has changed than when coffee was made in 10 years and will probably change in the future. So I just wanted to pull up on that. Sorry to interrupt you, Mary, but I just want to really, for the listeners to really understand that. Don't use yesterday's mentality to operate in the future, especially, and embrace technology, but get people in your team to embrace technology because it can become one of the best tools. Sorry, back to you.
Absolutely, Phil. And you've actually touched on a really great point that I had also in mind to speak to you about, is that another trend we're going to be seeing is that innovation is going to be a skill set that is required in all leaders, regardless of your industry, regardless of your background. And so what that means is that is also, by the way, a skill that can be taught, a skill that can be learnt and honed on and improved over time. So if you're not necessarily getting out of bed thinking, wow, I'm going to innovate today, don't worry, because that can be developed over time. But what I mean to say in that is that as these organizations flatten, as technology helps us to automate away tasks that are tedious, the competition is only going to increase, and so is the rate of change. And so what that means is we're going to have everybody at every level in our organisations innovating. Yeah. And leaders are going to have to be able to coach those skills out of people.
Yeah, no, well said. Creative organisations, right? Which brings me to the next thing I want to talk about with you, right? Obviously you run programs, you're at the forefront of this. We share the same outcome where we talk about, belonging, productivity and performance. Let's unpack performance and productivity because a lot of people are listening right now, and let me tell you, predominantly a lot of people that listen are cafe owners, so I'll put it out there and there'll be a lot of people nodding their head right now. We are paying baristas and cafe workers more than we've ever paid them, and that's okay. That's, to me, is a positive. But the negative side is that most of the time their performance and their productivity is less than what it used to be. And let me unpack that further. The speed of coffees. I started making coffees when I was 14. I probably became good at it at 17. So we're talking, 32 years ago, I was making coffees well. Now, well meant I would make 60 coffees an hour, right? That was the base. If you're a good barista, you could knock out 60 coffees an hour. Now, yes, the ball game's changed a bit in terms of milks. 95% of people in Australia drink milk. We used to have 3 types of milk. Now we've got about 330 different types of milk. But no, realistically, a cafe's got about 8 different types of milk, so it takes a lot longer to make coffee. But I watched the hand speed of baristas now. And this is one for the listeners, and if you're a barista, be aware of this and mindful of it. If you're a cafe owner, have a look at the behind the machine and watch the barista in operation. Their hand speed is not what it used to be. Baristas used to move quickly. Chefs used to move much quicker. And I want to unpack that with you as somebody that delves into the mindset of people, right? And then I want to also unpack some tools and tips as a leader, how we can get better from them. Get more from our workers in terms of performance and productivity. Because to me, number one is belonging. So if we've done what you said to make them belong, we've talked about the customer need, we've told them how their part to play in it, we've given them the autonomy to do it, we're giving them digital tools, that's all part of the belonging. How do we get into the mindset of our people to make them perform better and be more productive?
So Phil, put simply, there are 2 elements for me on this, right? In leadership, one thing that we don't do well in a lot of places, and as individuals, myself included, is we don't necessarily know what we're measuring, right? When we talk about performance. And so if you've got an employee, what is the benchmark? Yeah. What is your expectation as a leader?
Keyword expectation, right?
Absolutely, Phil. And so as a long-time HR practitioner and leadership coach, I believe in data. Yeah. Now, data is a word that scares people, right? All that data means is we're looking for patterns, pattern recognition, and we're looking for a starting point, right? So you don't have to have sophisticated data systems, et cetera, right? But you've got to know, and we help people with this when we're setting people strategy, is what are the things that we're measuring? Okay, where are the goalposts? So in your example, if you're measuring someone's performance on their ability to smash out 100 coffees an hour, great. Let's have that discussion. Let's share that expectation with people. If your expectation as a leader in the hospitality industry is that at every customer interaction, your people are upselling a product, great. Let's weave that into our performance discussions and make that expectation clear. And so one side of it is the data and what are we measuring, the benchmarks and being clear. And the other one, and as humans, we really struggle with this, and even some of the best leaders in the country, ASX CEOs, etc., struggle with this. Let's have some difficult conversations, right? And so if I'm as a leader being clear with my expectations and for whatever reason my staff aren't meeting them, sometimes we'll ignore that, right? Sometimes we'll think that problem will go away, but actually what it does is it demotivates a whole team and it brings down the whole organisation.
Yeah, you said it well. Key takeaway there is you've got to put measurements in place so that the expectation is met, because a lot of people don't know what that expectation is. So put benchmarks. Is it 100 coffees an hour? Is it 50 coffees an hour? Is it being able to carry 3 plates? Is it every time you go out to a customer with your hands full, you come back with your hands full, meaning you clear the table? These are simple things for people listening, is put those measurements in place so that you actually have a measurement that you can measure, and then collect the data to do so. And then part 2 is obviously have the difficult conversations. We've got a culture here at the Coffee Commune of see it, say it. We give people the permission to see something and say it. And if somebody gets offended, that's their problem, not yours. Obviously respectfully, but you see it and say it is a big part of our culture. And it enables people to have brave conversations, but also feel safe that if they're doing something wrong, they're going to be told. But on the flip side, they're also going to be told if they're doing something well too. So another key takeaway for listeners is don't just reprimand and have the difficult conversation when things are bad. Have the positive conversations with people, telling them when they're doing good, because people really, want that's that sense of belonging. It's not just always the positive and always not just the negative. Make sure we're having both conversations. One thing I want to talk to you about, which I've never spoken about before, and because it came out of the workshop I did with Gilbert Inoki over in NZ, and that is everyone talks about mindset. So everyone talks mindset first, skill set second, and it's great, right? It makes sense. So I'm going to throw a curveball at you that Gilbert, when he was asked how important is mindset, and he said very important, but second most important to something else. And everyone obviously in a room, and there was 50 world leaders in the room that run big businesses, amazing businesses, part of the YPO network, and it's structure. So, listen, if the listener's listening to this, mindset is important, but only second to structure. He says that what's made the All Blacks great is the structure first, then the mindset, than the skill set. And I look at that and I go, well, you're right. If you see a successful business in any industry, but especially in hospitality, a successful cafe, a successful restaurant, a successful, QSR business, anything in hospitality, a hotel chain, they have amazing structures. They have amazing structures for their products, amazing structures for their people, amazing structures for their distribution, amazing structures for their marketing. Then they go about having the right mindset. Then from that, they flow down to skill set. What's your take on that as an expert in, as a HR practitioner, but also as a leadership coach? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Phil, look, I would completely agree. So for me, in the people's perspective, I'm interpreting that word as structure I relate it back to people strategy. So, for instance, how are you differentiating yourself in the market in terms of your service offering, and how does your people strategy align? So do you have the right number of people in the right places? Yeah. Right positions with the right skill set at the right time.
Yeah, perfect.
So that is what structure is about. And you would be surprised the amount of people that would, come and talk to us about a leadership development program, but they don't have that structure right. They don't have that sort of foundational HR strategy right to benefit their people. It's really just putting a Band-Aid on top of something rather than addressing the core issues.
Yeah, no, great. And because it's one thing that we're unpacking further here at the Coffee Commune, and it'll be the topic of all our podcasts in this series, in this quarter, of people and performance and people and culture that we're doing at the Coffee Commune on our Been There, Done That podcast. So it's something I'm asking every guest in this quarter, what do they think about that model? Structure first, mindset second, and keep in mind that it's not 1, 2, 3. It's like a triangle. Structure sits at the top, and then you've got mindset and skill set, which is, if you flip it around, most people are always worried about the mindset and the skill set, but then they forget about the structure. And structure can be different things. In the cafe environment, it could be, where's your coffee machine placed? Where's your service counter placed? Is it right at the front, or do people need to walk through a room full of diners before they get to order at the counter? Yet, 70% of your business is takeaway. That's a structure. You're not going to get the best out of your people and not the best out of your customers if the structure of your positioning of your service counter is in the wrong area. In leadership, if you don't have structures in place, such as what our expectations, what our outcomes look like, what a success look like, then you're not going to get the right mindset and the right skill set. Tell me, what types of programs are out there right now that can help people? So people are listening to this and going, that all makes a lot of sense, and they don't have to agree with everything that we've spoken about. That's up to them. But if they say, hey, I want to be a better leader tomorrow than today, what are some of the programs and resources that people can tap into?
Yeah, so I would say, start with understanding what some of your strengths are. Okay, so in strength-based leadership approaches, we try and work out what's someone good at, what are they innately good at, and really use those to leverage. So once you if you have a high understanding of yourself, you can even do some free quizzes, or you can come and see people like us. Once you understand that, really leverage those. So whether it's about listening to podcasts, you need to continuously learn. So there are free courses online. You can do paid courses. As I said, you can use the functionalities of AI. But actually, we are very shortly launching a digital leadership course through Momentous.
Yes.
But it will really depend on the individual and the business and what they're trying to achieve. But absolutely, I would say implementing that Kaizen philosophy of continuous improvement. And as I said, leadership is a skill that can be learnt. So invest in yourself, set aside some time, and develop your people as well.
Yeah, the key one there for me is start with what your strengths are. The Gallup strength test is good. I've done that.
Yeah.
We used to put all of our teams, and we still do put our teams through that, understand what your core strengths are. It spits out your top 5. It can give you the full 30-odd strengths, but your top 5, and knowing that it's not a test as such, because there's no right or wrong. It spits out what your strengths are, and I'm happy to share with the listeners. My number 1 strength is problem solving. So when I did the Gallups, and I did it years ago, and did a refresher a couple of years ago, it really is amazing, and go, well, that helps me understand myself better, but it also helps me understand where I need to go. So, to me, the key takeaway there is step 1, measure where you're at right now. So Gallup's a great one. I'm sure people can tap in. We'll have the information as part of the podcast attached to this. Our producer will do that. Get in touch with Marija at Momentous for stuff like that. But the Gallup with me, number 1 was problem solving. Number 2 was visionary. Number 3 was strategic. Number 4 was connector, and number 5 was communication.
Wow.
So when you put those 5 together, I can understand where my strengths are, but I can also understand where my weaknesses can lie, and they call them shadows, of course. And important for listeners. So key takeaway again, do some sort of test like the Gallup test to let you know where you're at now, because then you can move on to part 2, which is all the things you spoke about. What programs do I need to embark on? What podcasts should I listen to really, diminish those weaknesses of myself? So capitalize on the strengths, but diminish, your weaknesses. So a really good takeaway out of that from yourself, Marija. Tell me, what does the perfect leader look like in your eyes? So you're building your avatar. What does a perfect leader look like to you?
Yeah. That's a really tricky one to answer, Phil, because obviously we've all got our own stories, our own journey that we bring. But I guess if we talk about an ideal paradigm, so building an avatar, like you said, for me, it would be somebody that loves people, somebody that believes in people, that believes people can grow and be better tomorrow than what they are today. And also someone that values the unique human experience of their staff. So you mentioned, weaknesses. If you know your weaknesses as a leader, it's great to build a team around you that complements those strengths and those weaknesses. For instance, if attention to detail isn't one of your strengths, partner up with someone in your team who covers that base for you, so that as a team, you've got all your bases covered. The other thing would be, as a leader, to realise that things are changing rapidly. We need innovation and problem solving, and empowering people to do that around you. So smart business people don't have to be the smartest person in the room, but they can pay and hire people who are smart to come and, solve the problems collectively as a team. And so moving away from the I and more to the collective of the team is something that I think is an ideal leadership trait.
Yeah, some really good points. Two more things I want to unpack. One is the word, and we couldn't run a podcast like this with an expert like you without talking about resilience.
Yeah.
So we have a big resilience deficiency. Everybody, we went through that era, and Simon Sinek's got a great little interview they did with him. It wasn't a TED Talk, but it was an interview that came up around, let's talk about resilience. And he said, stop telling Johnny that he's great at everything. Stop giving everybody a medal and a ribbon, and get back to the concept that the harder you work, most chances are the more successful you're going to be, and you are going to fall over, and you're going to have to pick yourself up and keep going. And no, you're not going to get an award or be told how great you are when you fall over, but you should be encouraged to get up and go again. Let's talk about resilience from your perspective, the highs, the lows, the negatives and the positives of this, and how do we get better at it?
Yeah, great question, Phil. I'm going to be a little bit controversial too, right? Mm-hmm. So as this new landscape is shifting, I'm seeing a pendulum swing in terms of an employer responsibility, right? So that's being legislated. Employers now have, more responsibilities than they ever have for people's mental well-being. And I just want to say, I think that's doing us, while I agree that it's required,
it's disservice. I'll say it for you.
A disservice, right? Because what that means to me is, as an individual, I essentially have very little responsibility for managing my own well-being, mental, physical, in all aspects of it, and also my own resilience. Yeah. And so what I want to say to people is, if you want to set yourself apart in this marketplace, you want to be a great performer and a great leader, take some of that back. Take some of that onus back onto yourself,
I love it.
Right?
Love it.
Because, if expectations are clear on me as an employee, and of course in a inclusive and supportive environment, I should be able to have input in that. So if I'm not at the stage where I can smash out 100 coffees an hour, I might say to you, look, let's do a stretch goal so that I can get to 80, and maybe you can coach me on how I can get to 100, right?
Correct.
I'm not just going to launch in and go, yep, I'll do it.
Yeah. Or the worst, launch and say, you're trying to kill me. I can't do that. That's not possible,
Yeah. And so what I would say to people is, in terms of resilience, resilience is like that rubber band that gets stretched and stretched and stretched and stretched, right? And needs to come back so that people can fill their buckets up mentally, physically, emotionally, in all the aspects of their life, right? So my view on resilience is, it's in our innate responsibility as human beings to manage our own resilience, right? So while an employee does have a role to play in an environment, they can't be responsible for every single aspect of your life, such as if you're not taking care of your body and your mind and you're staying up all night and not feeding yourself the right things and not sleeping. Correct. We can't expect you to come to work with a full battery and perform, right? Yeah. So manage yourselves. And the other thing is communicate expectations. So if you're being set a deadline or a task that you can't achieve, communicate that. Let that be known to your leadership or to whoever across businesses outside of hospitality too. If someone's relying you on something for something, communicate if you can't meet that expectation. So that's where we get into the difficult conversations. And my third tip is, yourself. What regenerates you and rebuilds your resilience as a human being is going to be different from the next person. So when you can, absolutely take time to look after yourself and to fill those buckets up and that battery up. Yeah. But also, I would say another controversial point, do less. And what I mean by that is not perform, right? But if you streamline what you're doing to less noise and cut out the messages, the emails, all of that stuff, and really focus, you're going to actually deliver a better, high quality product, a better outcome in that time. So I think the trap that sometimes people get into is that they spread themselves far too thin, and then they wonder why they don't have the resilience to tackle that. Yeah, look, you've explained it beautifully, and I'm so glad that we share the same mindset. I talk about the nanny state, the nanny country. If you don't wear a seatbelt, we'll fine you. You don't wear a helmet, we'll fine you. Smokers pay the same, at a hospital than a non-smoker. Well, if somebody smokes and they've got issues with, that come down the track, why aren't they held accountable? So to me, a big one about resilience is accountability. And you said it perfect that we need to be resilient within ourselves first, which means we need to be accountable. I used to be heavily overweight. I don't expect, the person, next to me to be paying for issues that would come with me being overweight. That's on me. And one of the reasons why I got healthy was because it
was on me, and I had to do that, not just for myself, but for my kids and the impact that I would have on others. Now, if I didn't show that accountability, then I wouldn't have been able to be resilient. So, you've said it beautifully. I'm not going to recap it except to say that resilience is about you taking responsibility for you and not expecting somebody else to do it for you. And I hope politicians are listening to this as well, because their solution seems to be, let's just put a new system or a new strategy or find somebody for doing this or not doing this. And all we're doing is we're cutting out. We're losing the ability for people to speak freely. I tell my kids, if you don't agree with the teacher, tell them, but tell them respectfully. No, don't sit there quiet and just take it on. Tell them, but tell them respectfully, in which case my daughter has, miss, what's wrong with my haircut? If you can please explain to me what's wrong with my haircut, I'm happy to play by the rule book of the code of conduct of school, but nowhere in school does it say that I can't have bangs. I didn't know what bangs is because I've got no hair, right? But I'm happy. And she had that discussion very respectfully with the teacher, but she didn't just sit there and go, yes, miss, yes, miss, yes, miss, right? So, I can give you a myriad of examples, but it's the bottom line is that it's on us to be better tomorrow than today. It's not on somebody next to us. And I really thank you for that comment, which segues nicely into my last thing I want to unpack. Before we wrap it up, we could talk all day, but listeners might get a bit sick of my voice. They certainly won't get sick of yours. Personal, professional and family. One of the phenomenons of the YPO network, the Young Presidents Organisation, is that we always talk about, even our monthly meetings with our groups and peers, is what's happening personally, professionally and family, because it's all of person that comes to work. Listeners that have followed me for years know that I talk about that. Let's talk about, and that is another streamline into resilience and all the rest of it, but let's unpack that as somebody like yourself who does leadership courses and works with people, the importance of understanding our people's personal, professional and family lines and getting the best out of people by working with people on those three areas. What's your take on it?
Yeah, Phil, I'm really sensing that we're, got a very similar mindset on things and viewpoints. So as I said earlier, we are people, and what makes us people and what makes us unique to technology and differentiates us from the AIs and the chatbots and all of that stuff is that we have a uniquely human experience. And so whilst we all try our best to be professional and not bring all of that to work, we can't help it because we're people. And so understanding what's going on for people personally, someone might be going through a hard time at home. They might be victims of DV. They might be not sleeping because of their kids. They might be going through financial hardships. Bearing that in mind helps you become a better leader because you can connect, you can listen, you can establish that sense of belonging. But also it will help you differentiate what people's motivations are. And so when you know that, you can tailor their employee experience to them individually. So professional is also important because you've got to know what people are working towards. And coming back to our discussion on resilience, I want to call out some people there. If you're unhappy in your workplace, right, you can't expect your employer to solve all of life's problems for you. So if you're not aligning in values with the organisation that you work for or the employer that you work for, we've heard anecdotally people leave managers and not organisations, it's on you to find an opportunity that aligns to you. Yeah. So please do self-select yourself out of that environment and find something that better aligns. But coming back to leadership, knowing what the person's professional goals are really important because you can structure their workplace tasks, what they're working on, their responsibilities to tailor that. And sorry, what was the last one? Family, absolutely. That's what makes us tick, right? I know for me, I've got two little ones. My little daughter Olivia is 4 and my little son Tommy is 17 months. And I would hope to think that the work that I'm doing with leaders and organisations is going to mean that when they go to work, that there is some better leadership practices than what I experienced as a young person.
Yeah, no, well said. And tip for the listeners is get those pen and papers out, get it out of your head. Your head has 60 to 70,000 thoughts. That's if you're sane. If you're insane, you're probably having 200,000 thoughts a day. But 60 to 70,000 thoughts a day, get out of your head, piece of paper and a pen, write personal and write 2 or 3 goals, professional 2 or 3 goals, and family 2 or 3 goals that you want to achieve. Once you've done that, any teams you're leading, whether it's a team of one, whether it's your family. People forget that. I do this with my family. I sit down with my wife and I sit down with our kids, a 16-year-old daughter and 14-year-old boy, and we say, right, what do you want to achieve personally? 2 things for yourself, just you, new language, new sport, new skill. What is it? What do you want to do family-wise? And then, family dance lessons is on the card. Family dinners once a month is on the cards. What is it, family? And then for them, obviously, professional is school. What do you want to achieve? So, and that's leadership, right? That's not just us leading our family, but that's also teaching them to lead, and they've gone on to share that with their, with their friends, that format. So listeners out there, piece of paper, pen, personal, professional, family, do it for yourself, and then flow it down to your teams. It really is a game changer. One of the comments people say about me, Marija, when they say is that Phil will always ask, how are you and how's your family? And it's a meaningful question, and it's not a tick and flick because you're a whole person. It's not just the work person. So I'll always say to my team, how are you? How's work? My brother's getting married. That's fantastic. What are you doing for the wedding? Etc. And then after the wedding, I'll actually say to them, how was the wedding? Oh, you remembered. Well, of course, if I'm going to ask you a question, I'm going to mean it. I'm going to have an authentic conversation with you, not a tick and flick conversation. And can I tell you, as a person who's managed and led hundreds and hundreds of people at any one time, the key is connectivity. It really is the ability to connect, to belong, all the things we spoke about today. So if you took nothing else away, which is impossible, especially with an amazing guest like Marija, understand that achieve one thing, make people belong. If they belong, then you can flow down and make them perform and get the productivity. But if you're not making them belong, you're not going to get the performance or the productivity out of your people. And it is different times. We are operating in unprecedented times. It is not going to get any different. It's only going to change again. And think about that. It's not going to get any different, meaning it's not going back to where it was. It's just going to change again. The needs of people are going to change. The needs of leaders are going to change. The needs of followers are going to change. The needs of customers are going to change. Try and anticipate and be ahead of the time. Marija, closing words from you before we wrap up the show. What would you like to say to the listeners that are listening to this?
So look, I would just say, as leaders, remember that you're dealing with people. You're not dealing with bots. You're not dealing with objects. They're all unique. Get to know them, understand them. And as leaders, you learn, you evolve, you get better. Leadership is the key to a better society. So please invest in yourselves and, of course, reach out if we can help.
Yeah. And reach out. As I said, Marija, very, very experienced in what she does. She's a director of Momentous Australia. What they do is deliver bespoke programs to help leaders gain the capability to lead confidently, which is so important. Lead with confidence in today's digital age. So get a hold of Marija. The details will be there. Please do that. And remember that people turn up to work, not things. Think about that. People, not things. So you don't have to be an expert in what you do with your thing, whether it's a good or service. You need to be an expert with people. On that thought, Marija, thank you once again.
Thanks so much for having me, Phil. It's been a real pleasure.
The pleasure's all ours. Until next time, you've been listening to Phil Di Bella. Go and be the best you can be. Here at the Coffee Commune, we bring you people that have been there and done that. It's all about accelerating your potential.